All right, guys, we are gonna be basically talking about Dirk's motor. We're almost completely done. All right, guys, we don't often see too many of these. You know, there are carbon brakes out there for the GTRs, usually stuff from the Corvette, the ZR1, and these are actually from RPS carbon. So this is a different style of carbon that we're used to seeing that's in the automotive. This stuff really is made for the race car in mind. Really for guys in the 200 mile per hour club that are doing the half mile events. This stuff works really, really well. You know, not suited for the daily driver. The big difference is with this carbon, you're actually using also the same material, carbon, against it. So it's carbon on carbon, whereas with the other stuff, you're not doing that. You're using, you know, a typical brake pad with your carbon ceramic. So this isn't carbon ceramic, this is a fully carbonized carbon. And again, you know, nothing you really want to do for street use. This is the type of setup you put it on. If you're going to a half mile event, you stick these bad boys on. This is going to give you unparalleled, the best braking performance for stuff like that. So you gotta get the car stopped in a hurry. This stuff will do it. There is the ability to run this on the road course, but you have to add some other modifications like ducting. This stuff gets really, really hot with repeated use. So these rotors, front rotors, come in at 14 pounds. To give you an idea, that's what the carbon each, and this will get the job done. So you can see that they have a direction that they go in. So there is actual venting that occurs on the center vane of this carbon rotor. All right, guys, we are getting ready to put our little air guide on. So I developed these really for the N8 to twin turbo guys. It uses the factory non-turbo core support existing holes that are in there, but we've been using them for the TTs, and all you have to do is you got to just drill and tap 2 new holes. So really all you need to do to install them on a twin turbo chassis is just a punch and a drill with a 13/64 drill bit. And last but not least, a 6mm by 1/0 tap. So we've already drilled the holes here, and you basically take our guide, line it up with our radiator, punch your holes, drill, and we are gonna tap the holes. I always like to use a little bit of cutting oil when you're drilling and you're tapping. You can also use grease, but cutting oil is preferred. All right, so we're just gonna tap our first hole, clean the flute of our tap, add a little bit of cutting oil, and there you have it. Our new holes are ready to go. So you can see the factory has a little bit of a guide. This car is missing it. At one point the radiator was replaced and it wasn't removed from the original radiator, but even then, so you got a decent gap. You can see how much of a gap we have here. Even with the radiator mounts, it's not gonna pull it back enough. So this guide we have is gonna help keep air going through our core, and we're also gonna be adding the Powertrix carbon fiber air guide as well as a complement to it. So that way air has no choice but to get through our radiator. All right, so here we have the twin turbo version of the Powertrix carbon fiber air guide. The twin turbo version has the holes already there, ovaled out for the factory upper radiator mounts. I've gone ahead and drilled for our air guide. The non-turbo version that Charles sells has the holes here, so you could order either one if you're gonna pair it up with our air guide. So here's the beautiful thing with this guy is now it's going to essentially cover the area between the core support and the center panel. And with that, we can get our Specialty Z air guide. It'll sit on top like so, and we're gonna dress it up with some Z-Spec hardware. Get these lined up. All right, we'll get our Powertrix carbon fiber air guide in place, get our Specialty Z air guide on top of it, and then we'll get our upper radiator mounts. We'll put some Z-Spec hardware on those guys so we have it all matching. And there you have it, guys. We'll get that stainless cleaned up, but a much more finished product. It just looks cleaner, and you get the benefit of getting a bit more airflow through the core of the radiator instead of it escaping out through a few different areas. Look at that. Look how nice that looks. Hell yeah, before and after. All right, guys, we are gonna be basically talking about Dirk's motor. We're almost completely done assembling it. Dirk's was the black Z32 we had on the dyno. After just a few dyno passes, started to hear that terrible noise. We were getting a little bit of rod knock. We shut it down, and unfortunately, sometimes that stuff happens. So especially when you're pushing it. Dirk had just purchased that car from a bring a trailer auction, and sometimes you don't know what you're getting. Car really looked nice and clean. Everything seemed to be, you know, installed correctly, but you really don't know, right? So motor had been built previously. We got the bottom end back to our machine shop, and Kyle basically told me that, yeah, the previous machine shop that had worked on it didn't do a good job with the crank, and the crank was essentially scrap. It was unusable. We found that cylinder number one, the journal on that cylinder just was demolished. We were able to save the rod end cap and reuse it. So we reused the connecting rods, of course, refreshened everything up, sourced a good used crankshaft that we could put back into the block. And the other thing that we did replace were the pistons. So pistons were high compression. You know, a lot of guys have a theory that they like higher compression because they can get better response. Yeah, while it's true you can increase VE, the volumetric efficiency, you get better fuel economy with higher compression motors. We found that we can definitely make a lot more power with a lower compression piston. We're able to get a little bit more air into the cylinder. We can make more power on lower octane, and we can make actually more power on E85 as well. So we like to keep it forced induction setup, typically with the factory style compression, lower compression ratios, because we find that it's just gonna make better power. So we did replace them. We ended up going with Wiseco pistons. Thankfully, we were able to keep the same bore size and just kind of do a light little light brush hone, I should say, on the cylinders. So we've got it all put together. You know, the car does have the Haltech Elite 2500. We're gonna be adding our cam trigger kit to it. We added the BE exhaust gears. While we were in there, we did a little bit of head work. We increased our valve size by 1/2 mil, went with the SuperTech intake and exhaust valves. And we've also gone with the JWT 500 cams. So gonna get a little bit more power without having to increase boost pressure by doing some head work, changing the valves, upgrading the cams, and getting our cam gears dialed in. So this thing is coming along. We're just waiting on a set of JWT Sport 700 turbos. Hopefully we'll have those week or two. So it looks pretty good. We'll take a look at that crankshaft, the pistons and everything that was in there, and just talk a little bit about those parts. All right, so take a look. This is our #1 rod journal, and this is the one that was making all that noise. So other ones aren't horrendous, but we found that these were out of spec. So they were a few thou off, and this thing was just going to tear itself apart sooner than later. We could tell that it had been put together recently, and the power was pretty low on it. It didn't feel quite peppy, and hence why Dirk kind of wanted to bring it to us get it checked out, see what it'd make for power. So power was low, didn't really feel super responsive. And you know, we're gonna be addressing all those issues. But yeah, I don't have my equipment here to show you how far off some of these journals are, but always be very mindful of who you select for a machine shop, especially if they've never done anything with a Japanese engine. You know, an engine is an engine, but there are things that that can vary as far as tolerances and what you can get away with. So this guy is basically going to be used as a nice decoration. Dirk wants to keep it. And then here are our higher compression pistons that came out of the motor. So you can see there's no dish in there, it's just a flat top. I would venture to say this was probably in the 10-to-1 compression ratio range. So we've gone down to about 8.8 from what the Weiscos are. So those are bye-bye. Everything looks pretty good. You can see relatively fresh. Everything looks good for the most part. And the old cams. So we've gone ahead, upgraded our cams, gone with the JWT 500s, and that's going to help, once again, make more power without having to increase our boost pressures. So we'll hit the dyno with this thing. We're gonna do, of course, our braking procedure, and you'll see that you can tell it's only got, you know, the Nismo 740cc side feeds. Dirk's not looking to go too crazy with power. He just really wanted to be responsive and, of course, hold up, you know, making about 550, 600 wheel on E85. And he will be running on 93, lowering the compression ratio of the motor. And the goal is for him to drive this thing across the country to go home in it once it leaves our shop. So it's got all the nice bells and whistles. Looking forward to getting it up and back on the dyno. All right, guys, we have G's Z32 twin turbo. It's got most of the FBO bolt-on stuff for E85, stock turbos, stock exhaust manifolds, stock inlet piping. It has our 2.5-inch intercooler piping. G's been on E85 for quite some time, I think about 6 or 7 years, and brought it into us because it's got a little bit of a misfire. It's been running a little odd, and we ended up updating his Walbro fuel pump install with our brand new kit. We reused his fuel pump. It looked fine. And you know, with our kit, we get rid of that fuel pressure relief valve that's at the very top of the fuel pump assembly. So we've got it on, and we've noticed that it's a little bit inconsistent. AFRs did get richer adding our kit. Fuel pump controller was already bypassed, and so we've got it here on E85, and we can see that we've got a little bit of dips in here. Calibration, you know, is nice and clean. It doesn't have any of these anomalies in our air fuel, and this actually completely prevented us from running the car any further. It just went fully lean, stopped, cut out. So we've got something weird going on. So what we've done is, in the name of getting more data and seeing what's going on, we put a fuel pressure gauge on to make sure our fuel pump is doing what it needs to do. And I also want to test one of the mass airflow meters. So if we have something electrical like a mass sensor that is going bad because it's inconsistent, we might do the next pass and it'll actually be really good. So we're going to check fuel pressure, and we're going to start by replacing one MAF at a time. It has a cell and translator on there. The MAFs were already cleaned as part of the service that we did, so it's not that, but we're going to go ahead and start by using a good known MAF, and we'll do them one by one. We'll make some passes. We'll get a little bit of video on the fuel pressure gauge and see what's going on, and see if we can't get to the bottom of the funkiness on the way. So we went through the process of elimination. We swapped out our MAF sensor. We started on the left-hand side. Problem was still there. We did some data logging to see where MAF voltages were. Ended up being the right-hand side mass airflow sensor. So that took care of our problem. Went ahead and dialed the rest of it in. Fuel pressure was not our problem. We did did look at it, it does drop a little bit, but that's because our boost pressure also drops. So remember that boost pressure and fuel pressure follow each other. Stock turbochargers, boost is going to drop off at the top. So we peaked about 20, 21 pounds of boost, and towards the end of our RPM, we're right around 15 pounds or so. So you're going to see about a 6 PSI drop in fuel pressure as well. So yeah, not too bad. From 7 years ago, it's making roughly the same power. So pretty happy. 7 years of abuse on the 85. I know G's talked about replacing turbos and doing exhaust manifolds and that nature, but he might end up doing that with his other Z32 that he has. So this one is back to running tip top again.